Oft himan haga, ara gebideth, metudis milce, death the hemod kerig, geond lagulade, longe shiolde, prad mid hondum, crimkeld sac, wedden recklessness. Weird beast for lered. The solitary man always waits for prosperity, for the favor of fate, although he, sad at heart, has long had to stir the ice-cold sea with his hand, traverse throughout the waterways the paths of an exile. Fate is wholly inexorable. The translation, though beautiful in some way, and in keeping with the original author's imaginative wordplay, loses a lot of the appeal of the original poem. This is but the beginning of a poem. This poem, called The Wanderer, is one of the classic examples of Anglo-Saxon poetry. It is also one of the few fully intact ones. It shows the usual elements of Anglo-Saxon poetry. Anglo-Saxon poems did not rhyme. There are a few incidents where the poems do rhyme, but there are exceptions to every rule. At the time this poem was written, Old English was just beginning to play around with the rhyme, much like a baby will play around with anything new. Instead of rhyming, there is a rhythm to the poems. There is not one rhythm for the whole poem, but a single line will contain repeated rhythms. Take, for example, the first line. Oft himan haga, ara gebideth. When this phrase is written, we usually write it in two parts, like so. These are the two halves of the line. They usually share the rhythm. This rhythm can be written so. This rhythm pattern is not repeated in the next line. Metudis milce, theath the hemod kerig. In this respect, an Old English poem is alike to a song. Indeed, many experts believe that these poems were sung, accompanied by small lyre-like instruments or harps. Anglo-Saxon poems also play around with alliteration. Once again, the alliteration does not carry over lines, but stays within the line. In this line, there are two alliteration patterns: the alliteration of the letter M and the alliteration of the letter thorn. As with the rhythm, these patterns do not carry over into the next line. In the first 5 lines, every line has a different letter alliterated. In the first line, it is the letter A that is alliterated. In the second, we have already identified the alliteration of the letters M and thorn. In the third line, it is the letter L that is alliterated. The fourth has the letter H alliterated. The fifth, the letter W. The alliteration adds extra stress to certain words or syllables, as we would instinctively give extra importance to those words. In this way, the alliteration adds to the rhythm, which itself is merely a pattern of stresses. The poem, or the copy of the poem that we base this on, was written by a Christian poet. If it was only the copy of the poem that he wrote, then he took an already existing poem and added a prologue and an epilogue, much like the poem Beowulf. However, it is in all likeliness that it was he who wrote this poem originally. The poem was found in a book called the Exeter Book, a compilation of riddles and poems. Anglo-Saxon poems did not have names, but modern scholars have given the poems names for ease of reference. The poem itself is mostly a monologue. The speaker is a warrior, whose lord and comrades have been slain. At the time, this was quite possibly the worst situation possible. It meant that the warrior had no lord, and thus no place in society. He was effectively turned into a homeless man. He begins by recognizing that a suffering man must do so silently. Indeed, this entire episode is inside his head. We are hearing the man's thoughts. He dotes constantly on his memories of his lost comrades as he travels lost. At times, he thinks back on better things, even having hallucinations that his friends are alive, only to plunge deeper into his sorrow. He then goes from his own personal sorrow to the greater sorrow of the world, the deplorable state it is in, and the general hopelessness of it. He ends by stating that all the foundation of this earth will become empty, meaning that eventually the human race will die out, and there therefore is no reason anymore. Yes, emo poetry goes back that far. The poet then finishes the poem invoking God, stating that it is only through him we will find consolation. We do not actually properly know how any of these words are pronounced, but we could make an educated guess. Overall consensus is that it was spoken or sung slowly, with the gaps shown actually spoken. We may have the pronunciation totally wrong, but almost all experts agree that we have the pronunciation of the words rather close to what the original pronunciation would have been. Over time, we have gained letters, lost letters, changed letters, added and lost words, combined our language with Norman French, until our language has become estranged from its ancestor. However, that does not mean that the poetry of the latter does not retain its meaning or its beauty. This poem, The Wanderer, has influenced many people, both in ancient times and in modern. Most of you have probably already heard at least part of it, at one point or another. J.R.R. Tolkien took a part of the poem for his book, The Lord of the Rings, and the same speech was put into the movie version. He managed to put the entire feeling of the poem into a few lines. Where are now the horse and the rider? Where is the horn that was blowing? Where is the helm and the hauberk, and the bright hair flowing?